Anne, we're with you if that's all right.
Great stuff. Just give me a second to sort out my PowerPoint. I'm trying to do something quite jazzy here, so let's see if this works. Okay, you should be seeing me in the corner of my slides. Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today for this seminar on singleness. A bit about me, first of all. I became a Christian at university in London. I now live in Newcastle, and I work part-time for Living Out as the content director. So I look after the website and podcasts and that kind of stuff. And I also do some stuff with my local church as well. I realised that a lot of people tell you about their spouse and children. I don't have a spouse or children. I have a cat, but I was trying to think of some interesting facts that I could tell you. So I like wild swimming. I like samba drumming. I have an irrational fear of buttons. So there you go. I'm same-sex attracted exclusively. So when I became a Christian, I realised that singleness was probably going to be a lifetime thing for me. I have had a few relationships with women in the past, but I'm now at a point where I am happily single and celibate. So hopefully that will come across in what I say. I sometimes get asked whether I'm married. My favourite line was a guy asked me, is there a Mr. Witten? And I said, yeah, my dad. You get asked some weird stuff. We haven't got long in this session, so I'm going to make some assumptions that as church leaders, you're clear that the Bible is radically positive about singleness, that singleness is a gift from God. I will obviously refer to the Bible a bit as we go along, but I want to focus mainly on how we can challenge some unhelpful narratives around singleness and how that we can make our churches places where single people could thrive. So what I want to do, first of all, is to set what I'm going to say in the context of the culture that we're immersed in. It's a culture which conflates sex and intimacy, and it makes romantic relationships the ultimate good. Whether we like it or not, we're surrounded by it and it feeds into our thoughts and desires. Sex is seen as a primary goal of life in our culture. I think there's a very strong message that you're not fulfilled if you're not having sex, and that there might even be something wrong with you. Society's fairly set up for couples, isn't it? You know, restaurants, holidays, the single room supplement is a bane of my life. We see aspirational family setups in adverts. The sort of happy family has always been a way of selling things. Here's a retro 7-Up advert. And more modernly, brands are adapting, often in controversial ways, portraying different types of family setups, but it's still all focused around sex and romance. So you can see here's a picture of River Island's advert redefining family for us. But it's still all about sex, relationships, family being about a sexual relationship. You hardly ever see happy single people being used to sell stuff, particularly not happy older single people. There's an assumption that everybody is either having sex or looking for sex. In fact, I take some medication, which means that it's dangerous for me to get pregnant on this medication. And I went to the pharmacist to pick up my next lot of it. And when I was there, the pharmacist started lecturing me on how dangerous it was to get pregnant and that I must use contraception and everything. And he kept going on and on about it. And I said, I don't need to worry about contraception. It's not a deal for me. And in the end, I just said to him, I am not having sex. In a crowded pharmacy. He got really embarrassed, ran off into a store cupboard. But it's really unusual, isn't it, to be an adult person who is not having sex. In our society, we see films, we see literature, music, Disney, royal weddings. They all tell this fairy tale story of romantic bliss. Lots of TV plot lines revolve around romance and marriage. The implication is that unless you're having sex, you're condemned to a life of loneliness and isolation. I did a trawl around the web to see if I could find anything positive on virginity. But I found that it is almost uniformly ridiculed. So here's a BBC article telling us about the sadness of living without sex. Here's a Guardian advice column entitled, I'm 34 and still a virgin. What's wrong with me? I looked at an advice website to see if that would help, and I found some interesting quotes. One of them said, back in 1800, being a virgin when getting married was standard, normal, and even looked on as a good thing. But nowadays, pretty much everyone has had sex before marriage, and plenty of it. Further down, it said, losing your virginity can be a rite of passage, signalling a transition from childhood to adulthood. Preachers about virginity almost always talk about low self-confidence, lack of meaningful friendship, and trouble relating to others. There's shame and ridicule and stigmatization. I did find a positive article on virginity, but it turned out to be about losing your virginity later in life. Losing your virginity was still the important part. So this person talked about having sex on their own terms. It was about readers on the joy of losing your virginity in the 30s. Notice how it's sex on my own terms. It's not quite the sacrificial giving of ourselves to one another, as we might expect from a biblical point of view. There are cases of young people choosing celibacy, but it's often for a short period or because of bad experiences with sex. This author remains anonymous, and his reason for choosing celibacy was because he had a degenerative brain condition. I was interested by their choice of image to illustrate this story. The fact that there aren't any contemporary images of celibacy is quite telling, isn't it? So culturally, sex is a big deal, and there's a huge pressure not to miss out. So what's the church's story? Well, I love the church, and indeed we're all part of the church, aren't we? But I think we need to acknowledge that sometimes the church has merely offered a Christianized version of the cultural story. We saw earlier that losing virginity can often be seen as a rite of passage into adulthood. But in much of church culture, that can just be replaced with marriage. There's a very real danger that we idolize marriage and elevate it above singleness. I think we've got into a bit of a mess over gay marriage because we've bought into the cultural narrative that you're unfulfilled without sex. We're still making sex an ultimate thing. Essentially, we're idolizing it. I think we need to acknowledge where we've gone wrong when it comes to singleness in the church. Here are some of the damaging narratives that I've come across. First of all, there's a sort of true love waits movement in American purity culture. So in this movement, singleness is seen as a holding pattern before the real life of nuclear family starts. Obviously, it's good to not be having sex outside of marriage, but the purpose of being pure here is identified as being so that when you get married, you'll have great sex. It also equates love with sex, doesn't it? There's an assumption that sex in your marriage will be great, and that love really only waits until you're having a romantic relationship. This one was interesting, focusing on becoming the one. The idea of focusing on improving yourself rather than another person is good, but our motivation for holiness should be God, not to become the perfect human spouse. This one was interesting. God's writing your love story. There's this narrative of good things come to those who wait. God is writing our love story, but it's much bigger than a human romance. And I think this reaffirms the whole life on hold narrative again, doesn't it? This one was good, talking about a season of singleness, like having a bit of time out from real life. This one, again, shows that if you do singleness well, you'll have a great marriage. Benefits of singleness, sacrifices in singleness that will benefit you later in marriage. But this one's my ultimate favourite. This is about long-term singleness. Note how the colours have changed here. We've now got a black thing with a woman looking really gloomy and shameful. And notice the language as well. It's about how to cope. Not how to thrive or flourish or bless others, but how to cope with long-term singleness. Single people are often seen as a problem rather than a gift to the church. Now, we do often say in church that marriage and singleness are both gifts because we're aware that that's biblical, but I think often we don't act like it. We often act like singleness is the gift that nobody wants. Just as a little aside, I have actually found the gift that nobody wants. It's this little jewel. This was given to my housemate, who's about as girly as me. It's some sort of ceramic money box cat handbag. I don't know what this thing is all about. Anyway, we sometimes treat singleness as the gift that nobody wants. I think, unfortunately, churches often make life difficult for single people and make it hard for them to thrive. Here are a few things that I've noticed. Family services are often centred around nuclear families. They might even involve puppets, which I know some people love. That's not my particular favourite. Now, I'm not knocking children's work, but we need to think about how we can make our family services truly intergenerational and reinforce the fact that we're all family in Christ, regardless of our marital status. I think there's often a lack of teaching and support on singleness and on friendship, whereas churches often invest heavily in marriage preparation and support. There can often be a lack of acknowledgement of the reality that demographically women outnumber men in a lot of churches, so some won't get married. We need to invest in these wonderful women well, so that they can live out their singleness in a really good way. There can often be a lack of ministry opportunities for single people, especially women. Often they're confined to roles of catering or looking after children. I have to say, in my 26 years of being a Christian, I've only done kids' work once. It went pretty well, apart from a small girl got a big robot stuck on her finger, and then she tipped bubble mixture into her eyes. I have to say, I don't think children's work is my gifting. Now, this isn't the place to discuss the theology around complementarianism and egalitarianism regarding women in leadership. But if you are in a church that prohibits women from leading and preaching, then I think extra effort needs to be made to make sure that single women's voices are heard and that their gifts are used. Sermon illustrations can be another thing. Sermon illustrations that are often given by married people with children often involve things that single people don't really relate to. I think another big thing is that we're not always that good about showing the difficulties in our marriages. We often assume that all Christian marriages are great, and sometimes that's the image that Christian married couples project. And then we're really shocked when we see a married couple separate. The reality is that marriage is really hard, so I'm told. I have lots of friends who can testify to that. The church needs to do better in helping us not to romanticise or idealise marriage. I have married friends who wish they were single or wish they were married to somebody else. Some people find sex difficult and painful or non-existent. Sometimes sharing a house with a spouse can be exhausting and unbearable at times. We need to be more honest with each other. And I think sometimes as well, there's a lack of recognition that everybody's experience of singleness is different. Whether we're an introvert or an extrovert, whether we've never married or we've had previous relationships, whether we're widowed or divorced, whether we're same-sex attracted like me or opposite sex attracted, our age makes a big difference. Single at 20 is very different to single at 50. Our health, our background, whether we have a Christian wider family or not. Some people will be temporarily single, some will be long-term single, some will want to get married, some don't, some aren't bothered either way. To borrow a phrase about transgender people, if you've met one single person, you've met one single person. Our experiences are all different. One thing I would encourage you to do is to talk through these issues as a church leadership, work with single and married people in your church to try and make sure that church family and family life reflects the breadth of people's experiences and circumstances. We need to be able to critique the things both outside and within the church that are contributing to an unbiblical view of singleness. So I've put some questions on your handout that you can use to start a discussion, and I'll just whiz through them now. If you're a Christian parent, would you be equally happy for your children to be single or married? You know, most parents I've met want grandchildren, and they're often quite vocal about it, which can't help but make single people and childless couples feel second rate. Do our church leadership and ministry roles equally reflect the value of single and married people? Do we talk about being still single as though it's a transitory phase? Do we talk about our spouses as our other half? That's one that particularly gets me. Do we treat single people as though they're not quite grown up or don't have huge responsibilities or have loads of spare time or don't know anything about children? When we teach about abstinence, do we present it in terms of its benefits for marriage, like the true love waits stuff that I was talking about a bit earlier? Or do we celebrate abstinence as a reward in itself? Are all our celebrations in church centred around nuclear family, like engagements, weddings, births, christenings, dedications, baptisms? Or do we have ways of celebrating the single people in our church? And as I say, are we open about the difficulties in our marriages? Do we invite single people to share their wisdom, to pray for us and to serve in our families? So there are some things that I would encourage you to think about with the rest of your leadership in your wider church. Marriage and sex are good things, but they're not ultimate things, and we mustn't behave as though they are. There are lots of single Christians, including those who are same-sex attracted, and if they can't flourish in church, it's going to be difficult for them to stay. This is my 19-year-old niece, Hazel. I absolutely love her to bits. I especially love the fact that she's ginger. I'm really proud of her, and there are lots of things that I could hope for her future, and indeed lots of things that I pray for her. But my ambition for her is not whether she's married or not. That doesn't seem to be at all significant. The thing I want most of all is that she loves Jesus and serves him wholeheartedly for her whole life, so that through her many others will come to faith. So how do we do better? I want to talk a little bit about biblical hope and Christian community. As we've reflected, our culture, and sadly often the church, promotes the message that you need to have a sexual relationship or marriage to be truly fulfilled. But the good news is that for all of us, there is one who will love us unconditionally, who will always be faithful and always be there. That can never be a human husband or wife. All of us, whether single or married, can experience the love that we crave in Jesus and in his family. We all want to be loved by someone who would lay down their life for us. There are lots of counterfeits trying to seduce us, but we can know the real thing, true love that brings enriching and meaningful life. This is one of my favourite things that Jesus said. The thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy. I have come that they may have life and have it to the full. I'm the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. If we follow the good shepherd rather than the thief, we can know the true love that we're all looking for. I think church leaders can really help by teaching clearly and positively on singleness. And I've put some resources on your handout that go into a lot more detail on that. But here are just a few things that have really encouraged me in my singleness. The first thing is to point to Jesus. Jesus is the ultimate example of someone who was human and lived out his humanity perfectly. The lack of experiencing a marriage relationship or enjoying sex didn't make him second rate or mean he was missing out or unable to fulfill God's purposes for him. But he did need friendship and intimacy. His singleness didn't mean isolation. Paul's another great example of a single person who invested deeply in others for the sake of the gospel. He calls Timothy his dear son, and his letters demonstrate such a love for all those that he discipled. Valuing friendship is really important as well. We all need friends, and we need to model close friendship outside of our marriages and our nuclear families. Teach on friendships, especially those in the Bible like David and Jonathan, Moses and Aaron, Elijah and Elisha, Ruth, Naomi, Paul, Timothy, there's loads of them. Keep mission in mind. This is a real passion of mine. The Genesis mandate to go forth and multiply has been transformed by Jesus when he gives the Great Commission to his followers in Matthew 28. They're still to multiply for the sake of the kingdom, but this is a spiritual reproduction, not a physical one. Look at how Paul discipled others who went on to disciple more people and spread the gospel. Whether we're single or married, we're called to make disciples of all nations. Not only are single people not excluded from the top job, I think we're arguably better suited to it in some ways. Jesus and Paul both taught about the goodness of remaining single for the sake of the kingdom. There are those who choose to live like eunuchs for the sake of the kingdom of heaven. And Paul says, I wish that all of you were as I am, but each of you has your own gift from God. One has this gift, another has that. Now to the unmarried and the widows, I say, it is good for them to stay unmarried as I do. Paul taught that those who were married inevitably had their focus divided and their time taken up with running the household and investing in nuclear family. That's not a bad thing, but single people are able to serve the Lord in ways that married people just can't. As it says in 1 Corinthians 7, an unmarried woman or virgin is concerned about the Lord's affairs. Her aim is to be devoted to the Lord in both body and spirit. but a married woman is concerned about the affairs of this world, how she can please her husband. Jesus, Paul, Anna the prophetess, Rahab, Esther, Dorcas, Phoebe, they all invested their singleness in the kingdom of God. So my challenge to you is, are you encouraging the single people in your church to do the same? I'm inspired by the many single women and men who've made their lives count for eternity. Another thing that I think is really helpful and really important is to do real community. Christianity is a communal faith, isn't it? We're not colleagues or vague acquaintances. We are family, as Sister Sledge once sang. God draws us into the community of his people. My Iranian friends get this a lot more than those of us who are steeped in Western individualism. Regardless of our biological family makeup, knowing Jesus brings us into a new family, which means that we have parents and children and siblings and aunties and the occasional really strange uncle. This seems like a brilliantly positive thing that we can say to the world. You don't need to be in a sexual or romantic relationship to have value and meaning, because the creator of the universe loves you intimately and he wants you to know him. And he wants to draw you into the loving community of his people. Marriage and sex are good things, but they're not ultimate things, and we mustn't behave as though they are. Sharing lives acts as a corrective to the idealization of the nuclear family. The Bible calls us to live counterculturally in radical community. So I want to finish by suggesting a few ideas for how single and married people who can live out their calling well in the church. Now, this is something that I'm very much in the process of working out with the Christians in my life up in Newcastle and Gateshead. I have all sorts of people in my Christian family, including elderly Geordies and Iranian refugees and African families, students, a few oddbods like me who don't really fit into any category. But some of the things we're doing is having keys to each other's houses. My stuff isn't my stuff, it's God's. So everything that I have, including my home, is on loan and used to serve God and others. I share my house with another Christian friend. We have a key box on the side of our house so other people can use our house, people can come and stay, and we can offer hospitality to them. Doing chores together, just the ordinary stuff of life. It's not about adding in more meetings, but inviting others into the things that you're already doing, whether it's shopping, going to the post office, picking up the kids, whatever it happens to be. Different combinations of people sharing homes, whether you're single or married, different socio-economic backgrounds. I know people who are, I know single people who are living with families, or like an older couple, or a few friends who've clubbed together to buy houses. I just love seeing that in action. Total mixture of people going on holiday together as well. I often find this somewhat quite difficult because nuclear families all go, oh, it's our family time now, we're off on holiday. And those of us who are single are often stuck, missing our friends and not knowing who to go on holiday with. Everyone getting involved in parenting the children, that's really important as well. I don't really know much about kids, and I wouldn't say I'm gifted in that area, but it's been really nice for me to get to know children at church. I remember at one church, a lady who was fairly new asked me if I had any children. She had 4 of her own. She asked me if I had children and I said no. And she said, well, you do now. I thought that was really telling that, she wanted me to be involved in her children's life. Sharing money and possessions generously. I love that about the Christian life. When I was first a missionary a lot of years ago, a couple from my church gave me a car. And my family, who aren't Christians, were appalled and said that I had to give it back. I either had to give it back or I had to pay for it. And they just didn't get the sort of currency of grace that works in the Christian community. Another thing that we do up in my neck of the woods is called the Big Church Night In, where we just get together, open up the church building. There's no planned content. People bring a bit of food to share and we just hang out together. We do what we normally do in our own homes, but just in the same place rather than in individual houses. So you might bring a jigsaw or a bit of work or a game to play with somebody else or some knitting or whatever. Of course, it's not easy and we will annoy each other and we will hurt each other accidentally or on purpose sometimes, but we're called to keep working on it. That's why there's so much in the Bible about forgiveness and love and relational integrity and service. let's be the kind of churches that put the gospel on display in the way that we love and serve each other and point to Jesus. After all, he's the only one in whom our deepest needs for intimacy are met, whether we're married or single. That's the end of my talk. Thank you so much for listening. You can have a couple of minutes now just to send us any questions, anything that's cropped up from things that I've said, or if you've got any burning questions that you brought to this session, pop them on Slido, and then I think somebody is going to chair a Q&A. Thanks.
Questions are coming in. Do just take a moment. Head to slido.com. The little code is LO webinar, and we'll give a few moments for that to happen. I'm taking over. I'm Andrew. I'm taking over from Andy, who a lorry is crashed into his house or something. Bless him. So he's fine. So I will lead us through from here. Brilliant. I can see questions coming in. Thank you. And let's start with, there's a question here. How can we help? How can we pastor people going through unwanted singleness?
Great question. Thank you. This is where I wish I was a pastor. Yeah, I mean, I think this is something that a lot of people confront, and it's natural to feel like singleness isn't a gift that we want. It's natural to feel like it's a burden, and it can happen at various points. Like, I mean, how old am I now? 46. I've been single for my whole life, and there have been times where I've been really glad to be single. I've been, it's really afforded me opportunities, and I've appreciated that. There have been other times where it's been utterly miserable, and I've found it really, really hard. I think a lot of the things that I say, I think teaching well on singleness really helps. Because I think a lot of people who are single can have quite a low self-image, can feel like, because these messages are bombarding us, that there might be something wrong with you, you're not attractive, you're not, nobody wants to spend their life with you or whatever. It can feed into quite a negative self-image. So I think doing some teaching on identity in Christ, helping people to see their value as a child of God can be really helpful. I think doing community well is really important, because I think there's often this false dichotomy between romantic sexual relationship, all your relational needs are met, there's perfect intimacy over here, or singleness, loneliness over here. And actually it doesn't have to be like that. Single doesn't mean living on your own, not having any friends, not having anyone to go on holiday with, but we need to work hard at how to make sure it doesn't mean that. So I think doing church community really well, and not just having stuff for singles in their 20s, or stuff for singles that's actually a bit of a dating agency. Avoiding all the kind of things like, why are you still single, trying to match people up. Actually, believing that singleness is a really good thing, and helping the single person to believe that it's a really good thing. So it's also not bad to want to be married. And obviously, some people who are single and want to be married do get married. But I think we need to make sure that we want to get married for the right reasons as well. Because I think, you can enter into a marriage if you're insecure in your singleness and you're looking for another human being to complete you and to do what only Jesus could do, actually, then that's not a good recipe for starting a marriage. So yeah, I think helping people to be secure in their identity in Christ, making church community really plausible and viable and attractive. Inviting, also not seeing single people as a project, or inviting people into family life because you feel sorry for them, but actually going around to their house when they invite you. I think having a sort of mutual love and respect for each other, rather than, oh look, there's the poor old 36-year-old single person, we better tag her on to whatever's happening. I've waffled a bit there. I don't know if any of that was helpful, but
it's very helpful. I'll just add if if this is kind of a pastor or pastoral situation trying to support an individual, the only things I would add is just wanting to listen to and understand and acknowledge their pain, and not kind of brush it off as you shouldn't be feeling this way. But actually, if it's unwanted singleness and someone's coming to us in a pastoral situation expressing their difficulty of that, as in all good pastoring, we want to listen well and actually acknowledge the reality of someone's experience, not brush it off. Because just in that, it just helps us feel loved, doesn't it? It helps us feel valued, helps us feel less alone in things. Something that is just so key. And then I'd want to just be the conversations, or one of the conversations I want to be having would be around, what is it about singleness they're finding difficult? What is it about singleness they're not liking? Because actually it might be that actually for them, they don't have good close friendships and connections of people. And so that's a good thing to talk around. I think often it becomes a thing of singleness is my issue and is a really bad thing for me, when actually maybe the issue more is actually I've really struggled to connect to people, and why is that? And what could I do? And what can the church do to help me with that? Or it could be all kind of man of these kind of practical things, and just going a bit deeper than I don't like being single, or singleness is difficult, to why don't you like it? Why is it difficult? I think could be a kind of a helpful way of helping people explore. A quoted question is, have you come across any good resources to help divorced people consider singleness? It seems that remarriage is the default assumption for many. I can see Andy's back. He might have something good in this as well.
I hope so, because I don't.
Yeah, no, it's funny enough, I don't actually. I mean, I think in a sense, I mean, one of the issues, I guess, is that singleness will come in a whole load of different forms for people, whether following divorce or being widowed, people who are happily single, those who are same-sex attracted and single, those who are opposite-sex attracted and single. I'm not aware, if I'm honest, of good resources for those who are divorced and now single. I mean, there must. I mean, if other people do know them, feel free to put them in the chat or something. It may well be that there are sort of biographies or stories, as it were, where that's the case. But I'm not actually aware of any good resources, particularly aimed at those who are divorced and now single. Unless are either of you two aware?
I've just Googled something I've heard of. I believe that HDB, who many of us will use kind of their marriage course and marriage prep course, they do have a course of people who have gone through divorce or relationship breakdown. I think it's called Restored Lives, just Googled, which I have heard good things about, but this is coming as I have heard good things about. I would only want to echo what Andy says of this question is a helpful reminder to us of singleness comes from all kind of circumstances, situations that can very much shape our experience of it. And I think something I find easy to forget. And so when we're engaging with single people, teaching about singleness, thinking about singleness in the church, remember that huge diversity of singleness and single experience is really important. I also think actually, relevant to this question, getting singleness right is so key, because I think often our bad handling of both the theology and the pastoral response to reality of divorce and relationship breakdown has been because of our idolization of marriage and our failure to value singleness. And so actually, I think getting singleness right is good for so many reasons, including it helps us actually to practice some of the costly teaching of the Bible about divorce and remarriage and such like. I just think it's important to our pastoral response there as well.
Yeah.
Another question, and says, thank you so much for your talk. How can churches start to live as a community when it's not what we are used to?
Yeah, it's massive, isn't it? Because I think part of the problem is that we live in Western industrialized 21st century Britain. I think, I mean, I'm quite lucky in a sense in that a lot of the Christians I'm involved with in Newcastle are from different cultural environments. So I know a lot of Iranians, and they have a more sort of communal type of culture. I would say, start small. It's very easy to get really frustrated with church culture and just, think we're terrible at doing community. But maybe the best place is to just start small. And one thing that really challenged me was I spent quite a lot of time moaning about how the church was terrible at community, and then I suddenly realized I'm part of the church. What am I doing to help make us be better at community? And I also had a bit of an issue with gender specific things. We had women's days that were doing nail painting and men who were doing go-karting, and I just thought, do you know what, I'm going to start something. So I started a pool night, pool as in snooker, not swimming pools, and and it just sort of grew momentum, and it was for anybody who wanted to come and play pool, and people started bringing their non-Christian friends. It became a real missional thing, and it became a real community, and it was easy to do because we just went to a pool place. I think something like that, where you're not thinking about writing content. I think often churches feel like, oh, we've got to put on an event, we've got to have a program, we've got to advertise it all on social media and stuff. Just do something small, little social things. Another thing that I do with a group of Christians from different churches and stuff is called Food for Thought. That's actually quite a missional thing as well, but it's we meet, have a communal meal, different people provide that at different times. Sometimes we just do a bring and share, and then somebody does shares whatever's they're thinking about, reading about, or talking about, just for literally 10 minutes. It could be on aliens, it could be on friendship, it could be anything. And then we have discussions and play games, and it's just super simple to organise. But people love it. And the thing that's really struck me is people outside the church are probably even more desperate for community than we are. It's just snowballed. We started off with about 8 Christians. We now have about 50 to 60 people, most of whom aren't Christians, and they're the ones that bring their friends because there's such a need for community. So I actually think the church has got such a golden opportunity, not just to build better community so that we can thrive, but so that we can reach a world that is experiencing an epidemic of loneliness and isolation. And again, I do think just inviting people into whatever it is you're doing, rather than thinking, we need to have a big event on a Tuesday night. I've often thought, I'm going shopping. I wonder, I've got a few friends who live nearby. I wonder if they need any groceries, or if they're free, we can go together. It's just that sort of thing, thinking creatively about how can my life overlap with other people's lives during the week, not just on a Sunday.
Very good. Anything to add, Andy, how churches can start in this community thing? We can't. Oh,
sorry, I was just getting called away. I think Anne said most of what I would say, actually. So I would, probably not much to add. Sorry, slightly chaotic.
That's fine. Yeah. I would just want to echo what Anne says. I think often the question isn't what should my church do, it's what can I do in my church? And actually, I always want to encourage people, we can all do something. Actually, what can we do to befriend, to gather people, to break out of the mold of these little family units? Actually, we can just lead by example and begin a culture change from ourselves rather than waiting for anyone else or leadership or whatever to do that. And so, yeah, I like what Anne's giving us an example there. I like this one, Anne. Are singles groups, what are the reason for their singleness, well-meaning but counterproductive in the sense that it still leaves singles in an isolated group? Is there a role for specific gatherings of single people, or is that unhelpful, do you think?
I think, again, it's a bit like what we said, that no two single people's experiences are the same. So I think it's probably a case of it could be helpful for some people and not for others. I mean, I've never been in a singles group. I don't know whether I became a Christian at university, and then I guess at various stages of my life I've had more single friends because of age and everything. I've got quite a mixture of friends now, but a lot of people my age are married, but I tend to hang around with younger people anyway. A lot of them are single. I think there can be a place for it. I think it can be helpful. I mean, one of the best things to do is talk to single people in your church. I think sometimes we put on courses or events because we've identified a demographic and we think, oh, this will be good for them. But have we actually asked them whether they want it or whether there's something that might be a bit better? I think canvass the single people in your church, see if it would be helpful. There is a singleness course, actually, that, again, there's a link to it on your handouts. I've sort of audited the course. I've gone through all the material, and there's some really good stuff in it. So I think that could be a good thing to run at your church. But again, without the expectation that all single people should go on it, or that this is necessarily going to reflect the views or the life stage that all single people are at. But I would recommend having a look at that, because I do think there's some really helpful biblical stuff in that. And again, it might help people who are struggling with singleness. But yeah, I don't think there's a standard answer to should we have a singleness group or not. But I mean, I think talking to single people, establishing why you've got the group, what is the point of it, I think, you know, I don't think it should be, if the intention is to silo single people and, you know, have a thing for married people, a separate thing for single people, a separate thing for students. I'm not a big fan of that. I think, you know, I'm a big fan of mixing church community up, doing it intergenerationally, you know, making friends with people who are different from us. But yeah, that's just my 2 pennies worth.
Yeah, no, but I'd go further than not a big fan. It's not church for it to be segregated. Yeah. So
yeah,
there can be a place in church for you know, experience specific or interest specific gatherings, such as singles say, but that's got to be one thing within actually people also being connected to a broader thing. So only one part of someone's experience of church family, because the whole point is to be the most radically diverse community, because we can be united by the central thing of Jesus. And, you know, the unity of our community is meant to be a wonderful picture of the unity of God himself and these wonderful kind of things. So it's a both and. There might be a place for a single specific group if there's a good purpose to it, and if people in your church are keen for that, but make sure it doesn't become for any single people their only experience of church and the community, because actually we're meant to be all kind of interrelated in that way. Here's another. Do you have any advice about how to introduce singleness as a beautiful way of following Jesus to youth? Think about young people.
I mean, I often talk a little bit about culture, so a bit like I did just now, because I think it's I think what's good is to understand why young people might be averse to singleness, what the problems they might have with it. And again, you know, the best way to establish that is to talk to young people. But I think sometimes looking at some of the cultural messages and critiquing those and working out what people's deepest desires are is quite a good place to start, because I firmly believe that the gospel meets actually our deepest desires for love, for intimacy, for community and connection. I think the gospel, life with Jesus and in his family, is actually the place where all of our deepest needs are satisfied. So I think what I would try to do is to show how what it is that young people most care about is actually what Jesus promises. Because I think one of the things that we particularly worry about is, you know, are single people lonely, unfulfilled? You know, are they kind of seen as less valuable or less important or less attractive or whatever it is? And I think the beautiful story of the gospel is that we are precious sons and daughters of the creator of the universe. You know, that's whether you're having sex or not, you know, whatever you look like on the outside, whatever your family setup, whatever your skills and abilities, there is not just room for you in God's kingdom, but the unconditional, beautiful love that you desire, that is going to last for eternity, is right there for you, whether or not you ever end up having sex. So I think that helps, because I think we've traditionally, I think sometimes we've been unhelpful when we talk to young people, where we just sort of, Bible says no, you know, sex is in a marriage between a man and a woman. Tough luck if you're not in a marriage between a man and a woman, you know, just have a cold shower or whatever. You know, I think we can sometimes project just, you know, marriage is lovely, sex in marriage is a gift. For everybody else, the message is negative. But actually I want to reframe it and say the message is beautiful, it's wonderful. You can thrive as a Christian who's single, and actually there's lots of better things than being married about it. It's a bit controversial, isn't it? But I think it's better than marriage for me. Yeah, it's better than marriage for me. Put it that way.
In a sense, yeah, it's in a youth context, it's avoiding the risk, which is we play up marriage, we play up safe-sex and marriage. It's going to be great in marriage, all that kind of stuff. Yeah. And we're not saying singleness is bad, but we're implicitly saying singleness is bad. Here's the goal, here's the good life, here's what good could be preparing for you. And so actually to simultaneously talk up and talk about singleness is good. I always think it's the power of example, and just having good single people around in the lives of young people, so they get to see, oh, the world around me is shouting at me that adult singleness is this awful, desperate, lonely situation. And yet I'm surrounded in this church family by people who love Jesus and are single and have been for decades and actually are flourishing in life with him. And it just is real life examples in front of you, which dispel the kind of cultural myth. It's one of the reasons I'm at one of the youth festivals in about a month's time. And for the session we're doing on singleness, I've actually asked a lady in her 60s to come along and do that session. I've deliberately picked someone who is a bit older than me because I want the young people to hear for someone who's been single for many decades and can talk about the goodness of singleness from all that experience. So I think some of the young people look at me 10 or so years older than them and think, well, maybe you can cope to just about them, but it's not going to keep going, is it? But actually them hearing the experiences of and seeing the example of older single people is just so important and so powerful, I think. And just story is so powerful with younger generation as well. I think that's a helpful way to go. And you mentioned about the Great Commission sort of cancelling out the Genesis mandate. Should married Christians not bother having kids and just evangelize? What a great question.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure if I use the words cancel out, but clearly the sort of imperative for growing God's kingdom in Genesis was to multiply and fill the earth physically, because starting from one family, it needed to spread. We needed to populate the earth. The Great Commission obviously isn't about having physical children, but it's about investing in the next generation, often younger believers, discipling them and getting them to go on mission to share the good news, to baptize believers, to disciple them, and so on and so on. And I think sadly we often don't take that very seriously. A lot of churches forget that the main reason that the church exists is mission. It's to share the gospel. It's to make multiplying disciples of Jesus. I'm not saying Christians shouldn't have children. I mean, clearly, children are a good gift. They're a blessing. I don't think that there's the same imperative for Christian couples to have children, but I think obviously it's a wonderful gift for those Christian couples who are able to have children. I think that's very much just a decision that they make before God. But I think that the beautiful freedom of the Great Commission is that for those of us who can't have children for whatever reason, we are not second-class citizens. We're not in any way sort of down the pecking order in the kingdom of God, because we are all, whether married or single, whether we've got kids or not, given this amazing responsibility and calling to share the gospel, to have spiritual children. I mean, I've worked in mission work for a lot of my life, and it's a blessing and a responsibility, but I have spiritual children all over the world. I have younger people who I've invested in, I've discipled, who've told me things they wouldn't tell their parents. I still have people like that, which is great. I'm able to have a godly, hopefully godly influence in their lives and encourage them to continue to invest in the next generation. So I think it's massively liberating, but I don't think it means don't have physical children either. You can have physical children who then become multiplying disciples. Even better. Add to the add to the ranks.
Exponential. Brilliant. We've probably got time for one more. There's more questions than we can cover. Thank you everyone for submitting your questions. One last thing I pick out: how can we make church as family more than just a nice metaphor? Do you have any practical quick win ideas to get us started? Some practical things to leave people with?
I mean, some of the stuff that I mentioned at the end of my talk, I do think so. In our individual culture, we are very used to personal possession and personal ownership and things, and I really think the idea of communal ownership of things, the fact that everything I have isn't mine, it belongs to God, and I've seen that at work in the church, and that is really helpful. So yeah, I mentioned this couple gave me a car, but actually in terms of having keys to each other's houses and that sort of thing, saying that communicates not just a sort of practical thing, but this communicates this is your space, this is your home too. You're not a visitor, your family. I love it when I go around to my friends' houses and they haven't tidied up, and there's it's take us as you find us, because that's family. They're not putting out their best china for me because they know I'll probably break it, but I'm one of them. So I love that, and I try to do that. I share a house with a friend we've shared for quite a long time, and we try to make our house that kind of house where people could drop in without having an appointment, where there's a key box. We've had people come to stay for various lengths of time as well, especially when they've been recovering from operations and that kind of thing. I think there's no end to how many creative ways we can think. Sometimes just think about what you would do in your nuclear family and then expand it out. Think about the people that live near you. Think about, I know people who don't live in the same household but share cars or gardening implements or whatever. But I mean, time is the biggest thing that we can invest in each other. We're all busy, but I do think that idea of work out what you're already doing and see if you can do that alongside somebody else. So yeah, last weekend some friends came and helped me clear my yard and everything, and we had a barbecue, went to the beach, and it was just lovely because the yard needed doing, but rather than doing my yard and then not having time to see friends, I managed to employ some extra forced labour. I think they did most of it. I just kind of made cups of tea and stuff. But yeah.
I like it. Yeah, time is key, isn't it? Friendships, relationships happen that time. But then, actually, right, if we just do the normal stuff of life but do it together, then actually being family fits into what we're already doing. You don't have to add it on as an adult. And so I just try and think, actually, how can I just do my life and be involved in other people's lives? And so quick wins are those things of what have I got in my life I can invite people to join me? Where in someone else's life can I push my way in and join them and be a blessing to them? And that's the thing I always miss about church family, especially about singleness. It's very easy for me as a single to sit around and think, when are the married people and the nuclear families going to look after me and be family for me? But actually, it's important for us as singles to receive the challenge of we are just as much called to be family for other people. And that might look different at how we do that. But actually, we want to be, as a single person in a church family which lives as family, is thinking, what role do we play? So how do I be family for other people? How do I play my part in that? Not just wait for people to to do that for me. And I know you've got your handout and the link's gone in the meeting chat for us. It's really helpful. You put in there loads of helpful resources. Are there any 2 or 3 you want to highlight as particularly recommended, or just say, look at the whole list on the handout? Really good stuff on there.
In true me style, I've made the handout quite comprehensive. I think one of the best books I read on singleness is 7 Myths About Singleness by Sam Albury. It has the advantage of being cheap and quick to read, but I think it really helpfully unpacks some of the ways we've gone a bit wrong about singleness. So he's single and same-sex attracted himself, and he just, it really helpfully explodes some of the myths we've got around singleness. Kate Wharton is another. She's a vicar, single in her 40s, I think. And she's actually quite unusually made a commitment to long-term singleness. She talks a bit about that in a podcast on our website. And she's written some stuff on it, but she's written a book called Single Minded. It's quite a personal story. She's sharing her experiences, so they won't be the same as everybody's experiences. But there's some real wisdom in there and just some real honesty about being a 40-year-old virgin and that kind of thing, stuff that we often don't even talk about, but she very helpfully and very vulnerably talks about that. So I think those would be my standout books. Obviously the Living Out website, we've got some fantastic stuff on there, and I've highlighted particular articles that I think are particularly good. I would recommend all of those. There's also a website called Single Friendly Church, and they're all about, it does what it says on the tin, really. They're about how to make church more single friendly, how to make sure that we're listening to single people and not making assumptions, and that our church family life helps single people to thrive. So those are probably the ones I'd pick out, but really go and look at all of them.
Brilliant. And thank you so much. You've been encouraging, you've been challenging. I'm sure lots of people and lots of churches represented here will be hugely blessed by what you shared today.